out letters to many of you saying, yes, we are more than eager and willing to provide you with some support for your club efforts. How many of you know what VHH is? Somebody tell me. Virginia Horn Henry, what? Is it up there? No. Yeah.
It's a grant to help get women involved in sports.
Indeed, right. So Virginia Horn Henry was actually a former professor here on campus in what's now the Department of Kinesiology. And I am now a professor in the Department of Kinesiology as well. And more specifically, I'm a professor in the occupational therapy program. I direct the occupational therapy program here on campus. And so the Department of Kinesiology has had a very long and close connection to the Virginia Horn Henry Fund. It was a gift from the family of Virginia Horn Henry to the university, and more specifically to the School of Education, to fund activities that were related to women's involvement in physical activity and movement and the female body and culture is how the sort of grant wording is put into the actual gift. And so the Dean of the School of Education appoints a committee, and that committee consists of 5 of us that represent different departments across the School of Education. And we then send out this proposal, or request for proposals every year, not only to school sports clubs or rec sports clubs, but also to researchers, to people who are involved in special projects across campus, to people who might have a particular guest speaker that they would want to come and do a program here on campus, to people who want to start a new activity on campus that might, for example, we've had somebody in another department outside of the School of Education submitted a proposal to actually start a program, a lunch walk program for women, that would involve women in physical activity during their lunch hour, employees, so that they would gain further exposure and experience with physical activity and hopefully promote their health. And so we do a broad brush of different kinds of activities, and fund the broad brush of different kinds of activities. Our research grants, go oftentimes to faculty here in the Department of Kinesiology who are doing everything from studying, how women with chronic fatigue syndrome respond in terms of their psychological health and some of the factors that affect that, to a women's rowing, somebody who's studying the women's rowing team. So we do a very broad brush of things. But I came to talk to you specifically about one piece of it, which is the sports club funding. And as you know, we have had a long history of providing funding to the various sports clubs. But I wanted to give you a little bit more information about how the committee views and perceives the proposals that come in from the sports clubs. And probably the first and most important thing is that the funding is provided for women's physical activity and movement and their body in culture. We define that broadly, but you need to be able to show us in your club that you're doing something that is going to contribute to women's involvement in physical activity and health. Okay? So we've had some proposals come in where people say, well, 50% of our participants are women. Well, that doesn't, great, that's fine. We're glad to hear that you've got 50% of your participants as women. But that doesn't show us how you're going to improve women's involvement in physical activity. Okay? So if you came to us with a proposal that said 50% of our participants are women, but we want to increase women's involvement, and this is our plan to do so, we're going to have special recruitment efforts. We're going to actually, track how many women are involved in our program over time, and then come back and tell us that yes, you were able to increase participation by 20% or 30%, or that you made a special effort to purchase equipment that would help women to be able to participate, more fully in your club, or that you are making a special concerted effort, to do something that is going to enhance women's ability to be able to be a part of your club. then we will probably look on it more favorably. Okay? Those of you who are part of clubs that are solely or exclusively women have an easier time of it because you're obviously doing something that does involve women. So that's one of my first pieces of advice to you is that if you have a club that really your primary goal or your primary objective is not necessarily geared towards women, then this is probably not the right place to be looking for funding. Okay? There might be other places you could look, but this is probably not the one. So developing a good, strong argument for that women's involvement in physical activity is really, really important. The reason for that is that Virginia Horn Henry, as I said, was a professor here, and what she taught was women's gymnastics. And so when she passed away, her family felt very strongly that promoting her love and interest of women involved in physical activity was really, really important. And that's where we have our mission, is to really ensure that that's what's happening, that we're in some way on this campus impacting women's involvement in physical activity. Any questions about that? Okay, so I wanted to just kind of walk through the actual application process with you. So first thing, it has to be important for women and their involvement in physical activity. You will see here on our page that this year we've made a change. In the past, clubs have been allowed to just send their application in directly. And what we found was that when that happened, sometimes the rec sports administration didn't really know what was being submitted. And some of those applications weren't really appropriate or strong. Okay? So this year, we're going to require that you actually pass them through the Rec Sports Administration prior to submitting them to the Virginia Horn Henry page, okay? So that means that even though our deadline is, what, February 3rd, I think, you need to get your application, if you want to apply for funding, it needs to go to the Rec Sports Administration 2 weeks ahead of time, is that right?
Yeah, we'll cover that in our meeting tonight.
Okay. So you need to be thinking about that in your planning for submission. And that just allows us to know that the Rec Sports Administration is aware of what you're proposing. They can also, I think, help and guide you through this application process, give you ideas for a way to make a successful proposal come through. And so we just decided that that would enhance your ability to be successful, as well as make it easier on the committee to know that we're reviewing somewhat equitable proposals across the rec sports groups. Let's see. So who should we contact? We need to know kind of who's the leader of your group. It can be more than one person, but you need to identify one person as being the primary contact. And you need to include kind of who your sponsor is within rec sports, I guess, right? Is that how that works? I don't know exactly how that works, but who your sponsor is within rec sports. We'd like to see that name on there as well, in addition to your student names. We want you to be sure that you're very attentive to the directions. So follow these directions closely and do what they say, because we don't look favorably when people don't do that. That means that when we say we'd like to see your budget, we mean not only what you're proposing for the use of the Virginia Horn Henry funding, but also your just overall budget for your group. Okay? So we want to see kind of how the funding that we would give you fits in your bigger picture of funding and your budget for how you plan to spend that money. The committee looks more favorably on funding things that are going to stay with the club over time. So uniforms, equipment, items, that, as I said, will stay with the club and be used by many students, because we feel like it makes the dollar go further if it's used by multiple students over multiple years. So we look more favorably on funding those kinds of things than we do on, say, a costume that someone might only wear once, or that, goes with that individual when they leave the university. Or, something that is sort of intangible. We have had many requests, and this is one we struggle with every year, for funding for such things as, for example, ice time, because we know there's a charge for that, or travel to competitions, because we know that's expensive. So one way we've addressed that is we've said that there's a maximum, which I think is $2,000, I believe, for travel. So we will provide some funding for travel if you give us a real strong rationale for why you need it. But we're not going to be able to fund unlimited travel. And we will consider some funding for things that really are essential. For example, ice skaters have a hard time doing their sport without having access to the ice. So we understand that. But again, we need to see the overall picture, and we need to understand why the Virginia Horn Henry money would really make a difference to you and your club. Any questions about that, about the budget? Okay. There is within, you'll find on the page, there is an Excel budget sheet that should help you to develop your budget for the Virginia Horn Henry piece. But again, we'd like to see your full budget attached. And you need to be real clear about the difference between your overall budget and what specifically the Virginia Horn Henry money would be used for. Some other things you need to attach are a cover page, being very clear about what club the proposal is for, who the sponsors are, both the student and the staff sponsors. Include a brief resume or curriculum vitae for the individuals that are the key people. And then any other supporting documents. So if you wanted us to purchase equipment, provide funding for purchase of equipment, go get a quote. Print out that quote or put it in a PDF file and attach it. Okay, so we can see what you're really proposing. Another issue that we've had just in recent years is people asking for equipment that we know we funded before. That's a problem. Okay, so if you ask for funding for a piece of equipment one year and we know we did it last year, we're not going to fund it, and that doesn't go over real well. So you need to be really asking for things that are new and different, or providing justification. Like if you bought one and your club really needs three, then you need to provide the explanation. The proposal itself, a 2-page proposal, and you'll see, if you scroll down here, there are some very specific, I've got to do that, don't I?
Sorry.
That's all right. Some very specific questions or issues for you to respond to here in that 2-page proposal. Let's see if I can load it up. See the little Zoom thing here. Okay. So this 2-page proposal needs to address questions about what's the mission of your group, what is it that you're wanting to do and why, the number of current participants that are in the group and what percentage of those are women, and then your strategy for increasing the number of women involved, if that's what you're asking for funding to do. And then how the project relates, again, to women's physical activity, movement, and the female body and culture. So you need to develop an argument. What is it about your particular club or activity that is going to address that mission of the Virginia Horn Henry funds? The activities, what specific activities are going to be involved in your project, or what specific equipment you want funded, and then your plans for ongoing support of the project. So this is, again, where the Virginia Horn Henry is intended to be more of a pilot funding for new initiatives, not so much for just ongoing regular budget kinds of issues. And that's something that I think, we have been, again, very lenient in funding some of your ongoing activities, but what we really like to see is that you take the initiative to develop something that's new or different, or will push your club in a different direction or a new direction. That's going to be more favorably viewed than just the ongoing yearly budget. So again, your proposal has to be limited to 2 pages. And I think I've already addressed the travel request not to exceed $2,000. Attach your full budget. And then the final thing is that we do sometimes like to, if you've had a really successful project or used your funds for something that won you an award, or you did really well at something, we'd like to hear about it, because we're trying to promote this funding across campus, and we actually were featured at there's a women's leadership group here on campus of faculty and professionals across campus, and we featured all the Virginia Horn Henry projects there last year. And so we'd like to have opportunities to kind of get the word out about the things that you've done that are successful and are really unique. And so if you take pictures, or if you have a story to tell, or you have something that's really successful, we'd like to hear about it. And this is, again, something new that we've instituted, is we'd like to have a brief 1-page summary at the end of the year about what you did with your funding. Any other questions? Yeah.
Are the clubs, when they submit and they are applying for both equipment and travel, appropriate? Guidelines with that? Do they have access to both streams of funding then, or?
Yes. The amounts that the Virginia Horn Henry Committee actually provides, both to clubs and to researchers and to everybody, vary. So there's no set amount. We do try to be somewhat equitable, but you could apply for both. And again, given a very strong rationale for both, you could potentially get funding for both. Okay. But the onus is on you to develop that argument, to tell us why it's important, particularly to women, and what it is that you want to do, and to be creative and innovative and come up with things that, again, are going to expand women's involvement in physical activity across this campus. Okay. Any other questions? How many of you are parts of clubs that have received funding in the past? Which?
Competitive cheer.
What?
Competitive cheer.
Competitive cheer?
Track club.
Track club?
Basketball.
Basketball?
Dance league.
Dance league, yeah.
Women's rugby.
Women's rugby? Cool.
Taekwondo club.
Very good. I remember seeing all this. I don't remember all the details, but I do remember the names. Good. Excellent. Okay, well, I wish you well. And, if something comes up between now and February and you have a question, feel free either to contact your rec sports administrators, or you can just drop me, a line too, if that would be helpful. Or go through the people up at school, that they can help you too. Okay. Anything else?
There's
Okay.
no other questions. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Good luck.